In part 2 of this one-part series, we discovered that if Frank was ever an atheist, as he claimed, he was at best an habitual or emotional atheist, lacking any philosophical underpinnings or grounding. In this video, we're actually going to take a look at his 4 new arguments, but I just have to ask, given the nature of these arguments, why did PragerFU feel that the best person on the planet to talk about cosmology, chemistry, biology, and anthropology was a former Major League Baseball player? It's not just strange, it's ineffective. Did their other presenter get, I don't know, called off the mound? Is Frank pinch hitting for someone else? Whatever the case, Frank is clearly batting out of turn, so I have every intention of sending him back to the dugout. Let's play ball, Frank.
In simple terms, I was confronted with the awareness that there are really 4 big bangs that have to be accounted for, not just one.
4 big bangs? That's a quadruple play. You know, I'm partially convinced that Frank just really liked to say the word bang. Ball players and their locker room talk, right?
We're all familiar with the first big bang, right? It's usually the answer given to the question, why is there something rather than nothing?
In my thinking, that's the most poorly weighted question ever. From what we know, only one of those 2 things is even possible. Something. Although I'm totally open to Frank or any other Major League ball player demonstrating the existence of nothing or nothingness. That's obviously an oxymoron, and none of us would be able to actually be there to see it, or the lack of it. Sorry, Frank, but that's strike number 1.
The idea that there was nothing, it popped, and boom, there's something. That time, matter, and space all came into existence in some great cosmological flash about 16 billion years ago. Astrophysicists tell us that this first Big Bang yielded only a handful of fundamental elements, and that it would take billions and billions of years for the nuclear furnaces of trillions of stars to yield the 118 elements in the periodic table.
As far as I know, only baseball players think the universe is 16 billion years old. I suspect this is a conclusion Frank reached on error. The consensus, as I understand it, is that the universe is roughly 13.7 billion years old. Frank seems a little off base here. Aside from that, this is a pretty bad explanation for how scientists think and talk about the Big Bang. And his primer on the fundamental elements of our universe is clearly an attempt to make it seem like there's not enough time for all 118 elements to have been generated. Billions and billions of years, he says, but he's just told us that the universe is nearly 2.5 billion years older than we thought it was. At the very least, that should cover it, right? In cosmology, this is called an unforced error, or a swing and a miss. Frank moves on to biology.
So, how do you get life from non-life? How did abiogenesis occur? The notion that something can come from nothing. Where's the evidence? Well, you're going to need another something from nothing leap of faith, some kind of biological second Big Bang. For all the mind-blowing advancements we've made in physics, biology, and chemistry in just the past 100 years, we're still no closer to making it happen. We don't have a clue.
We do, actually. My buddy Aron has a number of videos on this topic. They're quite extensive and illuminating, so I'll link to them in the description below. But let me point out Frank's misuse of words and terminology. Frank calls abiogenesis life from nothing. But the whole something from nothing bit, which he used for the first or cosmological Big Bang, is a one-off. Once you have something, you can't say that something else comes from nothing because you already have, exactly, you have something. Frank follows this something from nothing pitch by telling us that we'll need to make a leap of faith. That's just Bush League bullpen shit. It takes absolutely no leap of faith to admit that there are things that we don't understand. Indeed, the paradox of knowledge makes our humility a genuine value, since the more we learn, the more aware we become of how much more there is to understand. Our ignorance expands with our knowledge. That's the paradox. The leap is in saying that our lack of knowledge about this or that is evidence of a God. We don't know X, therefore we know Y? That's a really screwball way of thinking. Oh, Frank is winding up again.
We still don't have a way to account for the great diversity of life forms. I mean, the huge differences between bacteria, plants, and animals. Nor do we have a way to account for the differences between man and animal. We still don't have an anthropology at this point. So we're going to need a kind of anthropological third Big Bang to account for all this, which of course is what Darwin was after in his Descent of Man thesis. Now look, Darwin answered a lot of questions, but he could never answer the core question. How did evolution begin?
Not difficult at all once you understand that we humans are not separate and apart from animals. We are merely apes who are not nearly as strong and yet somehow far more deadly. I would say that humans are more evolved than other apes, but MAGA. The mechanism of natural selection is actually understood quite well. I wish Frank would have pushed aside those books his Christian friends gave him in favor of some basic textbooks on biology, chemistry, physics, and critical thinking. Frank's batting average gets worse with every bang. Exactly the opposite of my experience, by the way. Let's bring this thing home, Frankie.
A final Big Bang is going to be required to explain how a mechanistic animal brain can become a self-reflective human mind. Even the lowest life forms have brains and central nervous systems. I mean, how does something like that become the mind of a Michelangelo, a Shakespeare, a Beethoven? Come on, animals don't do art and they don't appreciate beauty. But the problem is even more basic than that. How do you account for free will and introspection, let alone man's pressing existential drive to ask why? Well, we're going to need some kind of psychological fourth Big Bang.
Well, free will is having a hard time even getting on base lately, so let's leave that one alone. But if we could have accounted for all these other things before Frank died, do you think he would have stopped believing in God? No, of course not. This is my problem with most of the arguments for God's existence. They're heads I win, tails you lose. These how do you account for this arguments aren't compelling one way or the other. Even when you can and do account, people don't leave their faith. Reason didn't bring them to the dance, and reason ain't taking them home. Hundreds of years ago, Frank would have asked, how do you account for the orbits of the planets? Or how do you account for the diversity of life on Earth? He actually asked that kind of in this video. Having those questions answered didn't end people's unquenchable urge for the mystical and the magical, or the existential comfort they provide and which PragerFU, quite frankly, is selling. This is actually pretty simple. All of these four new arguments are arguments from ignorance in one way or another. And the argument from ignorance comes down to a very simple choice. 1, we don't know or understand how something occurs or happened. Or 2, magic. There is a near infinite set of things we understand now of which we were previously ignorant. But none of those things that we understand now has ever been explained by magic. That's never been the answer. So it's simply unwarranted to ever think the answer for some new or additional thing we don't understand is a magical being who lives in a magical realm. It's a lot like the question of why there's something rather than nothing. We know our ignorance exists, but we know nothing of magical beings and realms. Which is why my own thinking about this stuff is in no pickle. I think it's time for Frank to get down off the mound and maybe off the field altogether. And no, that's not some kind of sick joke about Frank's death. My sincere condolences to his family and friends. For PragerFU, I'm me. Thanks for watching.